Gold is supposed to be the last form of trust. Governments fail, armies retreat, currencies collapse. But gold cold, heavy silent remains. It sits in vaults as a promise that a nation still has something real beneath the paper. In 1917, one of the largest empires on Earth had mountains of it. And then, almost overnight, that certainty began to vanish. Russia, before the revolution, was not poor in metal. For decades, the empire had built one of the largest gold reserves in the world. It had tied its currency to gold to signal stability, to attract foreign investment, and to prove it belonged among the great powers. Beneath the politics, beneath the palaces, beneath the unrest, there was a financial foundation built on bullion. That foundation was about to be tested by forces far more dangerous than market panic. World War I had already turned Europe into a furnace. Armies consumed supplies at an industrial scale. Governments borrowed heavily. Railways, factories, and farms were redirected toward survival. Russia entered the war with size, manpower, and resources, but also with deep structural weaknesses. Infrastructure was stretched, logistics were fragile, political trust was thin. War magnifies every weakness. As the fighting dragged on, costs exploded. Weapons, ammunition, uniforms, transport, food, everything required money. Tax systems struggled to keep pace. Borrowing increased, and when confidence in paper weakens, governments lean on what cannot argue back. Gold. Gold begins to move. Reserves that once sat quietly in vaults become tools of emergency finance. Payments for foreign supplies, guarantees for loans, transfers meant to keep trade alive under blockade and pressure. Each movement is logical in isolation. Together, they begin to thin the cushion that once symbolized security. But war was only the first shock. The second came from inside. By 1917, Russia was not just fighting an external enemy, it was unraveling internally. Food shortages hit cities, transport systems faltered, soldiers grew exhausted, political authority weakened. The monarchy, long the anchor of the state, lost its grip. When trust in leadership breaks, financial trust follows. People begin to question paper. They begin to seek tangible safety. Gold, once a national symbol, becomes an object of fear and urgency. Where is it? Who controls it? Can it still back the currency? Rumors spread faster than official statements. And in unstable times, perception can move metal as powerfully as policy. The imperial government falls. A provisional authority steps in, promising order, reform, and continuity. But continuity requires control of territory, of institutions, and of reserves. The problem is that Russia is vast, and power is no longer centralized in the way it once was. This is where the story turns from economics to survival. The gold is not sitting in one simple location, waiting calmly. It is dispersed, guarded, and now caught in a landscape of shifting loyalties. Rail lines that once connected the empire are unreliable. Regions grow uncertain about who truly rules. Armed groups form, political factions compete. In times like this, gold is not just wealth, it is leverage. Whoever holds it can fund armies, buy supplies, secure alliances, or flee. Decisions are made quickly. Too quickly, authorities begin relocating reserves, trying to keep them out of danger. Trains carry bullion across vast distances. Secrecy surrounds movements, but secrecy also breeds confusion. Orders overlap, communications fail. In a collapsing system, even protective actions create risk. Because once gold is in motion during chaos, control becomes fragile. Different groups claim legitimacy. Different forces intercept routes. Foreign powers watch closely, knowing that financial weakness can shape political outcomes. What began as a reserve to defend stability becomes a prize in a struggle over the future of the state itself. And this is the critical moment, when gold shifts from foundation to objective. The value of the metal does not change, but its role does. It no longer quietly supports a system. It becomes the center of conflict between competing visions of power. Each side understands that whoever secures the reserves gains not just money, but credibility. A government can print paper. It cannot print trust. As authority fractures, so does oversight. Records blur. Chains of command weaken. The simple question, how much gold does the nation truly control, becomes harder to answer. Not because the metal disappears into thin air, but because the system designed to track and protect it is dissolving. And once the system dissolves, movement turns into disappearance. This is not a story about thieves in the night. It is about a state losing the ability to hold its own foundation together while war and revolution press from every side. Gold does not need to be stolen to be lost. It only needs to be caught in a moment where power, transport, and authority no longer align. If you want to understand how a nation with one of the world's largest reserves could see its financial backbone scatter during a single year, stay with this, because what happens next is not just about where the gold went, it's about who followed it. As authority splinters, the map of Russia becomes a map of moving power. Control shifts not only between political factions, but along rail lines, cities, and regions. The gold, once a symbol of national continuity, is now physically tied to geography. Wherever it travels, power follows. Trains carrying reserves move east, away from immediate danger. The intention is preservation. The effect is exposure. Each transfer requires guards, coordination, and trust in those giving orders. But trust is in short supply. Officers no longer agree on legitimacy. Civil officials fear being on the wrong side of history. Communication lines are unreliable. Delays multiply. A reserve that once sat behind thick walls now depends on schedules and loyalty in a country coming apart. Meanwhile, new political forces rise rapidly. Revolutionary groups understand that controlling cities is not enough. Armies require funding. Administrations require salaries. Supplies require payment. Ideology does not move trains, money does. And gold is the most convincing form of money in a collapsing system. The struggle for the state becomes a struggle for the reserves. Foreign actors also enter the picture. War has already drawn outside powers deep into Russian affairs. Some hope to stabilize parts of the country. Others fear the spread of revolution. Financial leverage becomes another instrument of influence. Knowledge about where reserves are held becomes valuable information. In this environment, custody changes hands, not through a single dramatic seizure, but through a series of local decisions, negotiations, and confrontations. Some officials hand over control to forces they believe will win. Others hide portions, trying to safeguard what they see as national property. Records fragment. Accountability fades. The gold does not vanish in one moment. It diffuses. As different factions secure portions of the reserves, the idea of a single national treasury weakens. The metal still exists, but it is now tied to competing authorities. Each group claims to represent the future of the country. Each uses what it holds to finance survival. This is the breaking point, when a reserve meant to stabilize one system becomes fuel for multiple systems. Logistics deepen the problem. Moving bullion is slow and visible. Securing routes requires manpower. In a landscape of civil conflict, every convoy becomes a target. Even when shipments arrive safely, the chain of documentation is thinner than before. What was once recorded within a stable bureaucracy is now tracked in conditions of urgency and mistrust. Rumors multiply. Some are exaggerated, some are true. But uncertainty itself has power. Markets, allies, and citizens all respond to perceptions about a government's financial strength. When no single authority can clearly state the size and location of reserves, credibility erodes, and credibility is as important as metal. One side may hold more gold physically, but if it lacks recognition or control over key territories, its advantage is limited. Another may control institutions but lack hard reserves. The link between bullion and political authority, once straightforward, becomes tangled. Over time, the side that can centralize power begins to consolidate what it can reach. Reserves are reassembled where possible, redirected, or pledged, but losses, diversions, and opaque transfers leave lasting gaps. The pre-war image of a unified, immense gold hoard no longer matches reality. The disappearance, then, is not a magic trick. It is the result of fragmentation under extreme pressure. War strained the system, revolution broke it. Movement meant to protect assets placed them in a battlefield of shifting control. Each step made sense in the moment. Together, they dissolved the coherence that made the reserves a national anchor. By the end of this phase, the question is no longer simply where the gold is. The deeper question is what kind of state emerges from a financial foundation that has been scattered, pledged, and repurposed during its most vulnerable year. Because whoever rebuilds authority will inherit not the old reserve, but the legacy of its disappearance. And that legacy will shape how the new system deals with money, trust, and power from that point forward. When the fighting settles into a new order, the gold question does not disappear. It lingers, shaping the foundations of the state that rises from the wreckage. Because reserves are not just about money, they are about credibility at home and abroad. The new authorities inherit a landscape where the old financial map no longer applies. Pre-war figures, once cited as proof of strength, no longer reflect what is accessible, pledged, or lost in the chaos. Some gold has been used to secure supplies. Some has changed hands in the struggle for control. Some sits beyond immediate reach. The image of a single unified reserve backing a stable currency belongs to a different era. This forces a shift in how the state thinks about money itself. Instead of relying on inherited trust tied to bullion, the new system leans towards centralized control over production, trade, and finance. The experience of fragmentation leaves a deep mark. When reserves can scatter under pressure, dependence on metal alone feels fragile. Authority begins to emphasize command over flows of goods, labor, and credit rather than only stockpiles and vaults. But the outside world still measures strength in traditional ways. Foreign governments and markets want clarity. How much gold is held? What backs the currency? What obligations will be honored? The answers are complicated. Negotiations over debts, recognition, and access stretch on. Gold becomes part of diplomacy, part of settlement, part of leverage. The disappearance of reserves in 1917 thus echoes far beyond that year. It changes the relationship between the state and its financial base. It reinforces suspicion toward external dependence. It shapes a system where political authority and economic control are tightly linked, because leaders have seen how quickly financial foundations can slip when power fractures. At the same time, the story becomes a lesson in how assets behave under extreme stress. Gold did not fail physically. The failure was institutional. The structures that tracked, protected, and coordinated its use broke down under war and revolution. Once coordination failed, movement turned into diffusion. Diffusion turned into uncertainty. Uncertainty turned into perceived disappearance. This pattern repeats across history in different forms. Reserves, currencies, and financial promises rely on more than metal or paper. They rely on stable systems of authority, transport, communication, and trust. When those systems weaken, even the strongest-looking balance sheets can dissolve into confusion. Loss does not always mean theft. Sometimes it means the breakdown of the framework that made ownership meaningful. For the new state, rebuilding means redefining trust, not simply restoring a gold standard, but creating mechanisms of control that do not depend on dispersed actors behaving predictably in crisis. The emphasis shifts from passive backing to active management. The memory of 1917 lingers as a warning. Wealth stored is not the same as wealth secured. For viewers today, the lesson goes beyond one revolution. It shows how quickly financial certainty can unravel when political stability collapses. It shows how assets become contested objects when authority fragments. And it shows that the true strength of a reserve lies not only in its size, but in the resilience of the system around it. If this deep look into the hidden mechanics of history helped you see events in a new way, stay with Fiscora Empire. These stories are about the structures beneath headlines, the flows of money, trust, and power that shape outcomes long before the surface changes. Subscribe and follow to continue exploring the financial turning points that quietly reshape the world.